I'm joined here on the set by our international affairs editor, Philip Turle. Hello to you, Philip. When we're looking at the G7 meeting here in France, let's begin with the standoff between the U.S. and how the other G7 nations perceive this.
Well, as you were just saying, this is taking place in a monastery, and I think a lot of people will be praying that things are going to go well and there will be a healing of that transatlantic rift. But I don't think any delegates taking part there, apart from the United States, of course, are holding their breath on this. The insults by Donald Trump towards its fellow NATO members, particularly the fallout over Greenland, which is part of Denmark, Donald Trump's aspirations to take control of Greenland. All of this has fragilized this relationship. And I think many participants are wondering how they can actually overcome all that now, especially face-to-face with both the war in Iran and also the war in Ukraine and the US pressure that is being put on the G7 and also on NATO. Now, just to sum this all up, let's have a look at what NATO actually is. The G7 actually is. A G7 is the group of 7 most industrialized nations: France, Britain, Japan, Canada, Germany, Italy, and of course the United States. The only one which isn't a member of NATO in that group is Japan. It was created back in 1975. Russia was formerly a member but was kicked out back in 2014 after the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine. So now it's just called the G7. This is a meeting of foreign ministers here in France today, working towards a meeting of heads of state of the G7, which will take part in France in July. Now, of course, the top stories beginning with Iran is on the agenda today. Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, is arriving. He is only coming for day 2. That already sums up the fact that there's a lot of work to be done. He wasn't here on the first day. There's also not going to be a joint communique at the end of the meeting, which also, I think, goes a long way to telling us that there are a lot of difficulties that many are not feeling they're going to be able to overcome during the talks today. First of all, none of the countries have offered support to Donald Trump over the war in Iran, and that looks as though they're not going to change their minds. Second point, there is a lot of concern about the oil markets, the increase in prices. They want to know what the US is doing about that, what the future is over the Strait of Hormuz. The US would like these countries to help it in taking back control of the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of consensus in that as well. And I think a big question about where the negotiations are between Iran and the United States. These 15 points put forward by the US, the 5 points put forward by Iran. Donald Trump saying they're desperate to negotiate. Iran saying they're not willing to negotiate. Who's in the middle of all of this? Is it Pakistan? Are they passing notes to each other? Where is all of this leading to? I think those are going to be the key questions that are going to be asked today to Marco Rubio when he's taking part in this meeting.
Now, also concerned about the U.S.'s position on Ukraine. Some worried that the Trump administration could push the country to sign an unfavorable deal with Russia ahead of U.S. midterm elections in November. Philip, does a G7 have any leverage here?
Well, they're going to try and put the pressure on the United States. I think there are a couple of points here that are important to underline. First of all, there's concern amongst the G7 members, not the US, but the other G7 members, about Donald Trump's pressure on Volodymyr Zelensky to come to the negotiating table and to sign an unfavorable deal for Ukraine face-to-face with the Russians, this to get this out of the way before the midterm elections in November. They've said this is totally unacceptable. That's what they expected to tell Marco Rubio. They also want tougher sanctions on Russia, and they also want to discuss repair work to the Chernobyl nuclear plant, which is going to cost about 500 million euros. That money is going to be raised by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So those will be, I think, the key elements on the table as far as that is concerned. And one other thing I think it's important to underline is that there is consensus on 1 or 2 measures, one of them being on the setting up of a G7 task force, which would be one to tackle drug smuggling. I think all of the G7 members see eye to eye on that.
All right, Philip. Thank you very much, Philip, our international affairs editor.